All right, well, welcome to our RIC Forum. As all of you know, we've been in this process for about a year now, I want to say, since about June of 2021, so almost a full year. And we've had a lot of educational events throughout this time, including our Bible study. We had 2 different kind of ABCs of LGBT kind of trainings that we did, and some other things as well. And today we have sort of an open forum with some of our guests here. I'll let them introduce themselves, but we're going to have some prepared questions. So we'll have prayer, we'll have some prepared questions, and then we'll have about 10 or 15 minutes at the end to ask questions if you have anything else that comes up, anything that you are curious about, hospitable curiosity, as we were talking about. So let's start with prayer, a good way to start. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Gracious and loving God, we give thanks for this time together. We give thanks for the curiosity that you have placed in our hearts and for the love and compassion that you have placed there. We ask that all of this would come together so that we might more earnestly seek to be your church, to be the hands and feet of Jesus for the sake of the world, to be a welcoming place, to love as Jesus has loved us. We ask all of this in the name of Jesus, our risen Lord. Amen.
Amen.
All right. So if we could just introduce yourselves, so just go left to right. My left to right, I should say, not stage left to right, Pastor Joey.
Hi, I am Pastor Joey. I am from Redemption Lutheran Church, just about 10 minutes away. I live in the backyard in the parsonage with my husband, Mark. I'll hand it off to you.
Hi, I hope most of you know me, as I am your administrator here. With him, that's about it. Not much to say.
Hi, can you hear me? Is it okay? I'm Jennifer Lehman. This is my wife, Karen. We're from Good Shepherd Lutheran in King of Prussia. And I'm a transgender woman. I have transitioned
9 years ago.
9 years ago. And a large part of our transition was actually the transition at Good Shepherd Lutheran Church. We've been longtime members there of 33 years-ish.
Something like that.
Our children went there through youth group. Speaking of youth group, that's how we met Daniel.
Yeah.
He was one of the youth pastors. He came in the year after I transitioned, so he only knew me as Jen. The vast majority of our congregation obviously knew me as my male persona because we've been married for
38 years almost.
38 years almost. So we'll fill you in on more of the story as we go forward today a little bit. But that's kind of in a nutshell who I am.
And I'm Karen. As we said, we've been married 38 years. Jen didn't tell me, or she didn't really know what was going on until around 2009, I guess it was. And it took me about 4 or 5 years to get on board and say, yeah, let's try and make this work. And I'm happy to say that we did, and things are going really well. We have 2 kids, a son who is 33-ish, and a daughter who's about to turn 30, both married, 2 granddaughters. Everybody's very welcoming. Our granddaughters call us Grandma Karen and Grandma Jen. Makes it the easiest. We know that at some point she's going to ask why she has 2 grandmas, and we will explain it all then, especially when she starts looking at old pictures of her dad being held by Grandma Jen that didn't look like Grandma Jen.
Great. Thank you so much. So as I said, we've got a few sort of prepared questions. And so the first one is, when going through processes similar to the reconciling in Christ process, sometimes the question comes up, well, why? Why do we have to single out LGBTQ people? Can't we just say, all are welcome? It says it right there on our sign, and just leave it at that. So I was wondering if you could speak to that, about do you, and if so, do you feel that it's important for churches to explicitly to make it in their welcome statement for LGBTQ Christians? And if so, why?
I'll go first. So I am on our church council, and last night our church council voted to start the process ourselves. And as part of that, they sent out a link to a video from the synod. And so Jen and I actually watched that, I think, on Sunday. And up until then, I hadn't really thought about why it would be important or if it was important. We do have on our building a set of doors in this rainbow flag that says "All are welcome" in our door, however it's worded. But as we listened to the presentation from the synod, the one thing they mentioned, and I don't know if you've seen the movie The Green Book. And they mentioned that and how that book was there for African Americans, for blacks, to know where they could go if they were traveling, where they would be accepted. And I started thinking, well, that's what this is, and that is important for people to know, not have to walk in a door and not have any idea whether they're really welcoming or not. By knowing that they are an RIC church, they know that they would be welcome there. So I'm looking forward to our church starting the process.
Thank you.
For me, I thought about that question, and being a good Lutheran congregation, you're getting a lot of volunteers, right? When you ask for volunteers to do the live stream or to do one of the other things, everybody's just raising their hand and stepping up.
It's a stampede, Jen. It's a stampede.
And I think people out there really feel that it's really it's not for them. So when you say it's welcome to all, we in our own minds go back and say, that's not for me. That organization isn't asking me to do it. They don't want me to do it. Or it's not welcome for me because of all my issues or all my problems. And I think that's why it's important and why we do a better job of getting volunteers if we actually ask somebody, would you volunteer for this or would you be helpful to do that? But also, if we reach out to everybody that's out there and say, you are really welcome, you, very specifically on that. And I think that becomes very important.
Thank you.
So for me, I went to a very conservative Christian high school where it was very easy to say the words, all are welcome, and then rip that out from under you, because what that means is often you're welcome to sit in the pew, or you're welcome to put your envelope in the plate, but you're not welcome to do much else. We won't let you join any teams. You can't do anything in leadership. And when a congregation has an explicit statement that says, LGBTQ people are welcome here, I can walk in the door and know right away that I'm welcome to worship, I'm welcome to be a part of the different ministries of the congregation. It's not you can sit here and whatever you call worship, you can actually participate in the life of the congregation.
For me, I grew up in the Lutheran church. I was baptized Catholic, but around age 5, my parents moved to Lutheran church, so I spent my whole life growing up in this environment. And I loved this church, and I very much wanted to pursue a call in this church, and obviously it all worked out. But that was pre-2009, and every time I tried to talk about going into leadership, I was met with well, you could be a pastor, but you're not allowed to be out. And you could be a pastor, but you're not allowed to tell anyone that you're gay or have a family or anything. So basically a don't ask, don't tell policy up to that point. So if I was going to pursue my call, I would not have a family. And I knew I couldn't do that. So to have a church explicitly state all are welcome and to actually mean it and to know that they have done the work of knowing the history of how the church has excluded people, to know they've done the work and understand that it's still a new thing to have a church explicitly state this. to know it's not that far back that there were people excluded because of this, I think is vitally important, because I went through that as I was going into candidacy, which is the process to become a pastor. I was out, I was openly gay, I was engaged to Mark, we were getting married, and that I knew going into candidacy it was about a 50-50 chance whether they would let me in or not. But they had a rule that if it was only because I was gay, they would let me go to another synod, because they didn't want to be exclusionary just because of that. They would just say, you know what, we're not ready for this. So I figured, fine, I will go through candidacy my own synod. And I got through. I thought, great, they know I'm gay, I'm not getting any straighter, so that issue's put to bed. Like, we can focus on how we're going to shape me as a leader, how I'm going to go to seminary, how I'm going to do these things. Fast forward 2 years later, been through a year and a half of seminary, going up for endorsement, which is the second step, and suddenly they're identifying all these problems I have, even though my professors recommended me, even though my classmates found no problems with me, even though my essay was not brilliant, but it was fine. I interviewed okay, but suddenly they're saying, well, he's not really a good leader, he doesn't really have these gifts, he can't do this. And he leads too much with his homosexuality. He's too gay first and not Joey first, whatever that means. They would postpone me for a year. And in that time, that put my scholarships at risk, that put my standing with the ELCA at risk. It changed our whole life plan because we were planning on going internship, and now that wasn't going to happen. I'd be staying at seminary for another year. And they made me re-go through the whole endorsement process again, and again, it's all swirling in my head. They had me get a therapist, they had me get a spiritual director, and I'm not saying that none of this work was bad. But when you're put through that and you have people telling you constantly, well, you're not really good at leadership, you're not really good at this, you start to believe it. And when I finally went up for endorsement again, they finally admitted, well, no, you've really done everything we've asked, and you've done it well, and you've written a good essay, and it's really just because of who you are that we don't want to endorse you. But it took a year of torture on my end, going through that, to get for them to admit it to themselves. And I thought we'd put that issue to bed back at the entrance, because again, they knew who I was. I didn't change. They just weren't upfront with what they wanted and what they believed. So again, there is something beautiful about knowing a church has gone through the work of knowing the history. And there's even not a beauty, but at least I would much rather have someone tell me, no, we don't want you, and save me the trouble, than put me and my husband through what we went through in that time. Having that explicit welcome is important, because there is trauma for a lot of us in that.
Yeah, thank you. So a couple of you shared some stories of like the rug being pulled out from under you. All are welcome. Yes, you can start this process. We're on board, and then they change their tune. So I was wondering if you had anything else you wanted to share along that line that you would be comfortable sharing, but then also interested in the flip. So on the one hand, there are churches that say all are welcome, or institutions that say all are welcome, and then you find out they don't really mean that it includes you. And then there are ones that do. So if you could share anything that you're comfortable sharing about a Christian community that has been welcoming and affirming, and they really meant it, and what that was like.
I guess there are a couple good examples of it that I had. We now do ministry. Well, we go out to Harrisburg for a transgender conference every year in March, and it's been going on for about 12 years now. And we've hooked up with a Presbyterian church, actually, Market Square, in the center of Harrisburg. and they welcome the transgender community into their Sunday service. And this became really rather amazing in the end, because there are 600 or 700 transgender people that come to this social and weekend-long conference at that point. Many of them because we party until way too late at night on Saturday night. Sunday morning is not an option, but we would get like 15 people from the conference that really, really wanted to go to the church and to worship as themselves, because many that come to this conference actually are not full-time trans women. They would be transgender, but they're cross-dressers or some other thing. So in their regular life, most of these people would be presenting as male. But during this period of time, they're women, and they're allowed, it would be very important for them to come in and worship at the church. So a few years before that, in another social event, because I like to be very social, I bumped into somebody at the dessert table of the Fall Achievement benefit out in Lancaster. And it turned out she was the associate pastor of this church. She is a lesbian with her partner, and they were becoming welcoming in their church, and we formed an alliance. She invited some of our members over. The members of this Trans Central meeting to come over when we were there that weekend. And it was so powerful to be able to take people over there and watch them worship as themselves. That welcoming was just amazing to see how it impacted my friends. And a lot of my friends were not talking all that much about religion during this particular time, but we were very spiritual, and to be able to do that was very powerful for them, and such an amazing gift that community gave to us. One of many.
For me, at the same time, I'm sorry, I jumped your question there.
Please.
At the same time I was going through all my candidacy woes, I also was assigned for my field education to be at a church called the Church of St. Luke and the Epiphany, which is on 13th Street in Center City, Philadelphia, which is, if you don't know, is the middle of what is colloquially known as the gayborhood. And a lot of the gay clubs are there. A lot of LGBT people have made their homes on 13th Street. So it's kind of the gay neighborhood in Philly. St. Luke's, for much of its history, has been an LGBT-affirming church long before it was popular or in vogue to do that. Their pastor, Roger Broadley, who just retired 3-4 years ago now, but I worked under him, has been an out gay man as a pastor for his 38 years of ministry. When the HIV/AIDS crisis was hitting the LGBT community, and there were lots of churches that would not even come near doing a funeral, they did hundreds for people who were abandoned, who their families wouldn't give them a Christian burial even though they wanted it. That's where St. Luke stepped in their ministry. So at the same time as I was experiencing rejection, going to that place every Sunday and just getting to be me, like, I wasn't odd. I was one of many gay men sitting in the pews, preaching, worshiping to them. It wasn't weird. And the freedom I had in preaching and the freedom I had in just being myself and not having to constantly think about doing, what are people going to think of me? What are people going to think of this when they find out? I hadn't experienced that much before, because I'm growing up in Butler, PA, and going to college in Greenville, PA, both small towns. You're always doing that calculus. So there is something freeing about being in a community where you know it's not a problem, or it's not even considered a problem, and that you're not the only one either. It was just, I felt the Spirit there.
Mm-hmm. So, I am a member of All Saints on Frankfurt, All Saints Torresdale Episcopal Church. The very first time I walked in the door, unlike a lot of churches I've been to, instead of people kind of rushing away like, ooh, we've got to stay, no kind of welcome, it was a descent. Everyone came to greet me. Immediately, we have coffee over here, immediately following worship. Please join us and do this. And someone saw my wedding ring. It was not a, where is your wife? It was a, oh, you're married, where's your spouse? I don't think sometimes we think about the fact that every day as queer people, we come out. It's not a one-time event. And when you have that kind of instant welcome, there's no expectation. And suddenly, I don't have to come out to these people. I'm immediately welcomed. That was incredible.
Thank you. Good. So the next question is admittedly very broad, but how does your faith shape your life? So, however you'd like to interpret that.
That's a tough one. I just feel that I live my faith, or I do my best to live my faith. I'm a preschool teacher at the preschool at our church, so I spend a lot of time in our church. We raised our kids in the church, and it's just part of who I am. I guess, as Jen alluded to, maybe I'm using it as part of being part of Trans Central PA. So as Jen gets a little upset about this. So Jen started going to these meetings obviously before I did, and I wasn't on board at first. Well, I am now the significant other program director for Trans Central PA. So it's kind of become our ministry to go, I go there and I talk to other spouses and try and help them through to see if they want to try and make their marriage work and be there for anybody that's trying to support either a spouse or a parent or whatever. So I guess I do use my faith in that way, especially when we go to the conference. We have sessions on faith and the way I talk to them. They know that I go to church and that I believe that what we're doing is fine. Let's say that's it.
Thank you.
Okay. My faith, what I found in my faith growing up was a God who loved me, and a God who cared for me, and I saw that through the other people who loved me and cared for me. And I think that affects my life because I wanted to be sure I could help create that for others, or be a part of helping create that for others. If I could find joy and love and hope in a space like this, then by God, I wanted to be someone who was helping to do that so that other people could find a space of love and faith and hope. So that's kind of always where my faith has been, is I want to share the joy that I found here and the love that I found here. And sometimes that means bursting through doors and breaking down barriers and standing up in places that you maybe don't want to stand up in, but you need to. But other times it just means, worshiping on Sunday and saying hello to the person who walked in the door. But if someone else is going to connect with God because of how I've lived my life, that's great.
I'm kind of similar in that as well. My faith, I've sometimes likened my transgender being as somewhat of a calling. I struggled a lot. I've always been faithful and believed in God and things like that, but I was always trying to figure out, why is it that I'm different? And why did God make me like that? And they made me like that. And it's really, I think, a part of my calling as to, I'm not a pastor, of course, or anything like that, and not that type of calling, but I think each one of us are set out to do things. And part of what I'm supposed to do is just show up as transgender. And that's a lot of work. It was really, really, really tough 10 years ago, when I first decided to create the upheaval in my life, basically lose Karen and my entire life to live this transgender. And I had this war with God at the point in time. I wrote a little story about it that I'm not going to read now, but we could talk about it later. But I was driving up to Albany for one of these conferences, and that's when I had the little war with God, and I was yelling at him, and I was crying in the car, and because I just had it, I just couldn't live this duality. And he finally set me on the right path and said, not go back, but he said, go forward and transition, and I've got your back. I spent the next 3 years praying to God that I wouldn't lose Karen, literally every day in the car on the commute down to work, it seemed to work. And then and you just see the glimmers every once in a while, like you said, where when you talk to somebody, and especially at the very beginning when Karen and I relayed our story to all those people in our church, we go up and, oh, Jen, we heard about what was going on. And so I would spend 15 seconds telling them about this huge story of my life that I have 2 hours to talk about. I'd get interrupted, and they would tell me their story. They needed to share their story, and I became a conduit. We became a conduit for them to share. And it was just so amazing to be able to be that conduit. Had nothing to do with being trans or gay. It had a lot to do with alcoholism or anything that they were struggling with.
Thank you.
So, like you mentioned, it's very easy to kind of go into that war with God, especially when you grow up in that kind of super fundamentalist evangelical kind of background. My high school was an Assemblies of God high school, if you have any idea how very kind of conservative that is. Exactly. We didn't have a prom, we had a formal because dancing is from hell. But, you know, after I was the first probably, my school was born in 1974. It closed in 2010, something like that. My graduating class was the biggest class in our school's history. We had 18. I was the first person in our school to come out. Within 2 years of that, 4 other people in my class came out in some form. And I feel that letting my faith continue to guide my life while living authentically as a gay man, I hope provided some hope to those other people in my class.
Thank you. So, spinning off of the faith question, do you have, yes? Yeah, let me give it a shot here. We're trying, let me see. There we go. Got it up a little bit low. Oh, that's too much.
Check.
How's that?
We'll get closer to the phones.
Yeah, there we go. Just don't tumble off the edge.
We will not.
Okay. So the next question that I have is, do you have a favorite story from the Bible of inclusion?
I'll start that one. Being a teacher, and I also teach Sunday school, and have taught for, 25 years. Let the children come to me. Just children. They don't know bad, evil, being prejudiced. It's something they learn from the people that unfortunately show them how not to be open and loving. And that's hopefully what we're doing in our preschool and with our kids, is just showing that everybody is human and they deserve to be loved and nothing else matters.
The story of the Ethiopian eunuch, I'm blanking on if it's Peter or Paul, though. Philip. It was a P. Philip is walking on the road. The Ethiopian eunuch's in the cart and comes by, reading a scroll of Isaiah, I think it was. And Philip goes, "Do you know what you're reading?" And he says, "Kind of." So Philip gets in with him and starts teaching him the scriptures. And they go by a pool of water, and the eunuch says, "Can I be baptized?" And there is no question. Yes, of course you can be baptized. Of course you can be part of the body of Christ. There was a little education, but not much. Like, it's not like you went through a full catechesis before they were baptized. It's not like they had to go through any sort of rituals and everything. It's no, you can join this community right now, and there's nothing to stop you. I've always just loved kind of the immediacy of that story and the way it's just, of course. Why wouldn't you be able to?
So for me, I tack towards a story that's recounted in both the Gospels according to St. Matthew and St. Luke. It's when a centurion comes to Christ and, depending on the translation, says, "I have a slave who is sick." But there is plenty of argument around what that original word was. He essentially begs Christ to save this slave because of this question around the language and this immediate, how quickly you can see how important this person is to the centurion. A lot of scholars have said, well, that's easier to translate to companion or lover. And Christ, sure, let's go. And the centurion says, but you can do this here. You don't have to come to my house. And Jesus responds with something to the effect of, I have not met anyone whose faith is as great as yours. And because of that, your faith, because of that, he is healed. There is no condemnation. There's no comment from Christ of, well, okay, but you have to change. There's no favorite line of hate the sin, love the sinner. It's just go. He is healed. And for me, that's not just a gift, that's not just healing, that's a blessing from Christ. And I just, when every day of, my entire educational career up through high school was, you hear this resounding, well, you're going to burn in hell. Again and again and again. Finding somewhere in the gospel where you can see yourself very easily is incredibly important.
Love one another would be mine.
And then the last question that I have prepared, that we have prepared, and you've all touched on it in various ways, but what do you wish the church knew about the experience of LGBTQ Christians?
I think the one thing from my experience is that we are among you already. And I don't mean that in a scary way, but we're not new. There are certainly some people who will convert or come in, but there are plenty of us sitting in the pews, plenty that you might not even expect. And the way you act, we see it. We pick up on it. It's not to say we're constantly judging anything, but we also have to be very defensive in our lives. So don't forget that we're here. We're not a new thing. We're not some fad. We've been here and we will continue to be here. Yeah.
So I would just like people to think that our faith isn't any weaker than anyone else's. I would argue in some cases, in order to be a person in full participation with the church, because of the obstacles that the church historically has put in front of us, because of often, quite frankly, hatred, we have to have, in many cases, a greater, stronger faith in order for us to persevere and stick with it. So other than that, the other thing that I think is important is that we remember that historically some of the language that the church has used, some of the things that we continue to hear every day, isn't just a "we don't want you here." It's dangerous. It can cause members of our community to leave the faith entirely, or put people into a position where their self-worth is so far destroyed that even worse consequences might happen. So those are things that I think that the church as a whole should remember and think about.
Kind of bouncing off of what you said, we're here. It didn't happen to me, but one of my close friends who does not present as a woman all the time was in church a year or so ago. Not our church, but his own, or I guess her own, as I usually know her. Was sitting out in the pews as the guy that she would be presenting as, and then I think one of the lay people in this church got up and was making just kind of an offhand, sort of since transgender had been in the news, was making a statement that they knew what their gender was, and it was kind of a joke and an in-joke type of thing. And people laughed. It apparently, not being there, but it really turned my friend off because it was very offensive. And it kind of goes to your point that we're there, we're sitting there, we're listening, and all of a sudden there's an offensive thing that is being said, which is just an offhand, normal in society way of our current society at any rate, way of talking. And he brought it up to the pastor at the time, and outed herself, to let the pastor know this was not good, not offensive. I don't know if anything's really happening with that church about it, but it has a huge impact. And I wish people would be a little bit more aware of what they're saying sometimes.
I don't really have anything to add to what's been said.
We will take about 10-ish, maybe 15 minutes, if they're up to that amount, I should say. If we don't have a lot of questions, that's okay. We're not going to sit here in awkward silence for 15 minutes. But if you have any questions about anything that you've heard, if you have one for a specific panelist, or if you want to speak to something someone said specifically, or if you have just sort of a broad question, and anyone who's comfortable answering is welcome to do so. And I'm going to be a parrot, so that way folks that are watching it on the feed later, that they can hear the questions, so that way it picks up on the mic. So, any questions? Yeah, okay. Mm-hmm.
What is the age bracket of your congregation?
Okay, so what's the age bracket of your congregation?
I would say probably most of the people are over 50, into their 50s, 60s. We have one or two young families, but yeah.
Are they already accepted?
Yeah, So coming to Redemption, when they called me, they have not gone through the RIC process. That's something we will be doing at some point, but making sure they didn't close first was kind of first on the agenda. Yeah. So when I got there, they started interviewing me, and one of the questions I asked in the interview was, I am gay, like, is that going to be a problem? Because I need a job, and I don't want to waste your time and mine if we need to move on. And they said, well, we don't think it will be, but we've never really asked the question. We've never really done a poll. They hadn't talked about it, really. And luckily, I stuck with it because I needed a job, and I felt like it would be a good match. I outed myself to the congregation in the bio that we sent out to them on paper. Like, I talked about myself and everything I'd done, and at the bottom I said, he lives with his husband, Mark. And so it was kind of at the end, just a little, didn't make a big deal, but people would know. We had one member after the vote who left. Everyone else was fine. I had no one vote against me. And that member who left about 6 months later met Mark at the yard sale and came back. So, I got very lucky, though, because I will say it's a lot of work to put yourself into that situation of being judged and not knowing where that's going to turn out, especially whenever, like, benefits and salary are on the line as well. So again, if they would have already gone through the RIC process, had that explicit welcome, that would have been a load off, but we got there.
So if I can just add one little bit of anecdotal information about when Joey was called to Redemption. The morning of his call sermon was, for him, I know, extremely stressful. For myself also. And he would not say this because as pastor he's not allowed to have favorites, but one of his congregants now, who is my favorite member of his congregation, after he does the call sermon, we're being taken out of the worship space to go sit in what ended up becoming his office to wait for them to take the vote. And as I'm getting up, I'm standing in the aisle, I'm waiting to go out, this member of his congregation now grabs me by the arm and goes, I hope you realize you're about to get 40 new moms. And I said to her, at least wait till you voted.
Good. Other questions? Yeah, George.
Not really a question, but I would like to thank everybody from the panel for coming and sharing their stories with us, because I think sharing your story is so utmost important for any of us, and especially any of us that are finding barriers and things that block us in our lives. Mm-hmm. And I think that, it's a great thing to hear your stories, and I'm thankful for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all for being here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and going through this process. It means a lot to us as well, at least, it means a lot to us that you're going through this, because it also gives us the opportunity to share our story a little bit more to everyone else. One, remember it. It's been a while since we've done that. But also just to be able to share it again, like you said, and maybe connect and resonate with whatever else is going on out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Can I share one positive thing that Jen didn't actually bring up? The church that we take people to when we're at this conference, so we hadn't had the conference for the past 2 years, and we had it this past March. And Jen and I at that point weren't sure whether we were going to take a group to the church, partially because of COVID, partially because we wanted to see everybody that we hadn't seen in almost 3 years. And by doing that on a Sunday morning, we don't get to stay at the hotel and say goodbye to people and stuff. So in our mind, we had kind of said, oh, we're not going to do it this year. Well, we get there the first night, and a couple that we hadn't seen in 3 years came up to us and said, hey, we signed up to go to the church. Can't wait to go with you. And 5 minutes later, another person comes over to us, and basically they'd been to some of Jen's presentations in prior years, and told us that they had seen Jen's presentations, listened to her, and knew that there was something that they were missing in their lives. And since we last saw them, they have started going back to church. And obviously, we went to church that Sunday.
Kind of both looked at each other and like, okay, God, we're going to church.
Yeah, Rich.
Well, every meeting I've ever at, I always have something to say. I guess I feel if I don't say something, I'm going to be like,
We were waiting for you to
I
say
wonder if
something.
there's a doppelganger here. Someone has stolen Rich's body and taken his place.
and I came from a church that actually left the ELCA as a position. And, you know, I have a lot of friends that I still associate with and hang out with that are extremely uncomfortable with this. And I constantly try to, you know, talk to them about it. And I'll admit, this is not my, I'm not, you know, as comfortable, really, to be honest. And, but I know one thing is that what happened to that church after they did leave the ELCA was just pure hell. Can I say hell?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was
You're in church.
And I always viewed what happened there, that them leaving the ELCA for that reason, to be the thing that precipitated all of the evil that, you know, that followed. So, you know, even though, like I'm stuttering now and stuff, but I don't think I'll ever attend another church that is not affirming. But I'm going to apologize right now for all the mistakes that I'm going to make.
Right.
Trying to, do my part to be an appropriate member of the firm.
Yeah, thanks,
But-
Rich. I'm going to just summarize real quick. So I know that, just for the microphone, so Rich shared that he came from a congregation that had left the ELCA over the ELCA stance on LGBTQ welcome, and they felt that they had gone too far, so they left, and that it was kind of fell apart in a fantastical kind of way, it sounds like. So, yeah.
Getting to your point about trying, and excuse you if you know, you make mistakes, and we all make mistakes. And so I'm visiting Mom a lot lately, and I still she's introducing me to her friends as he, and the friends probably know or don't know, but they're probably also thinking Mom's just kind of losing it a little bit because is she really? But you have to take that with some laughter and love, and especially with what you're doing here, and just the trying really is the important part of it all, to try to meet people on their own turf or on their own footing and actually see who they are for who they are.
And
So applause to you
Yeah.
for just trying.
We still have people in our congregation, when they're talking to me, they'll say Jen, but then they'll say he, because they knew Jen then. And it's hard. I mean, we're about to go to my 40th reunion for college, and, you know, Jen was not Jen back in college, and she went to the same college that I did. So people get all worried and stuff, and they don't want to say the wrong thing, and I'm like, it's okay. We know that you don't mean it. It's the people that say it nastily. Those are the people that we have a problem with.
And I would say, too, I appreciate your apology, but also, we will screw up, too. I mean, I know we're sitting up above you, looking down and everything, but when you start putting everyone on pedestals, and then when we do something wrong, which we will inevitably do, don't let that affect the whole movement either. Do you know what I mean? Don't let that affect your whole view of LGBTQ people, because someone you thought was perfect is in fact human as well. Because I'm not saying we're not going to try and do well, but we are just as human as you. So sometimes we will screw up and say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. It happens. That's life. And we apologize for that too. The only way we get through this is if we keep trying together.
And is it okay if I share something the comment that you made when we were setting up, Karen, about understanding and it really struck me. As we were setting up, Karen sort of just mentioned that we might not always understand, but that it's always important to have understanding. And I really appreciated that distinction. I think that speaks to some of what we've been talking about today.
I tell people I can't understand what Jen has gone through and how she feels, but I'm here with her. I'm being understanding, and I love her.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's a smile.
Any other questions or anything else? All right. Well, thank you to our lovely panelists. Really appreciate you taking the time and coming to speak with us and putting yourself out there. I mean, it takes some vulnerability to literally be up here and share your story. We really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you, everyone who came out tonight. As I said, this will be up on the website, so tell folks who weren't able to be here in person that it'll be up there just on our RIC page where we've got all our other resources. And looking forward to some of our next steps. I think the next thing that we're doing related to our RIC process is our book club. So that'll be Monday nights, June 13th. Is the first one, and it'll be all online, so even if you're vacationing at the shore, you can just bring your laptop and log on for an hour.
Smart.
And we'll be reading Transforming by Austin Hartke, and I have about 5 or 6 copies. If you would like one, let me know. I'll make sure to bring it on Sunday or Saturday. Okay, all right, 2, 3, all right. Do I hear 4? 4? So I'll bring them with me this weekend at worship. We're asking for $10 to help defray the cost. And I think that's pretty much it. First, let's show our appreciation for our panelists. So thank you.
And to you.
Thank you.
And let us pray. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Gracious and loving God, you have created us in our unique diversity. Not one of us is like the other, and we give thanks that you have made us this way. We give thanks for this time together to hear the stories of Joey and Mark and Jen and Karen. We give thanks for their life and witness in your church. We give thanks for the witness of St. John's and this process of reconciling in Christ. We ask that you would continue to guide us, that we might seek your will and share your love far and wide. Be with us as we go from this place. Keep us safe and help us to let our light shine before others. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right.
Thank you.
Go in peace, serve the Lord. I feel like
Thanks
I got to
be
say
to
that.